Hello and welcome to the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. The show rolls on. This is, in effect, our final 2023 World Cup podcast. We'll be talking more about the final and the tournament as a whole. We've got a great interview that Jo did with the Afghanistan head coach, Jonathan Trott. We've also got Saj Sadiq joining us on a chaotic week in Pakistan cricket, even by their standards. And we'll be previewing the big one, India-Australia, the T20I series that starts in 3 days' time. And we'll even squeeze in some county cricket chat as well. I'm Yas Rana, and with me today is Ben Gardner and Phil Walker. Michael asks, is this Wisden Cricket Weekly episode the podcasting equivalent of that upcoming 5-match T20 series between India and Australia? And Mike asks, how excited are we for the T20 series that starts on Thursday? Yes, India and Australia play a T20 series. At the time of recording, India haven't named a squad for it, but Australia have 7 World Cup winners in that team. 7 people who were involved yesterday. Taking part in that series.
Yeah, well, there was a gif going around of Travis Head with sort of like big party sunglasses on, his tongue sort of like lolling about, doing like finger guns. And you're like, how is this man going to play an international cricket match in 4 weeks, let alone in 4 days? Yeah, I mean, you know, hopefully they have some fun with it. And in a way, I think I'd rather play a T20I series after an ODI World Cup than an ODI series after a T20 World Cup, because at least you can go out, have a bit of a hit, you know, try some things. That can maybe have more of a party feel than, you know, slogging through 100 overs can. But yeah, also, do you see the report from CrickBuzz just now that Sky might be captaining India in it? So that'll be something of interest to follow at least. I don't know.
Yeah, I suppose it will. Ben, you weren't on yesterday's show. We recorded it during the trophy presentation, so missed out on one of the moments of the tournament.
Oh yeah, amazing. I mean, the whole end of the game actually had a very surreal feel. Glenn Maxwell hits the winning runs, and Ravi Shastri says, "And Australia have won the World Cup in front of 120,000 people," which is an addition of 30,000 on the actual capacity of the official attendance for the game, and B, half those people had already kind of left. And then it takes an hour for the trophy presentation to actually happen. You've got Ian Smith sort of narrating over a catch as the tournament montage, just heroically going on and on and on. And then it kind of happens, and Shastri's there just gripping onto this clipboard, and he's staring at it as he is reading out names of players. You know, he knows who Travis Head is. He knows who Alex Carey is, but he's staring at this as he's announcing all these names. And then that's going on and on and on. You have a very sad looking Cody Cummins gets player of the tournament award, that sort of thing. And then finally, Pat Cummins gets his hands on the World Cup trophy, presented to him by Modi and Miles, but he just gets it by himself, and then he's just got to stand there on the stage, and then Modi goes off and shakes the hand of every other member of the Australian team, and the camera just zooms in. An amazing bit of camera work, which you have to think that the ICC aren't actually too happy with, but just kind of zooms in on Pat Cummins' face as he's kind of smirking at the whole sort of surreality of the whole thing, I guess. But also, you'd imagine taking a certain amount of pleasure at this showing just how much Australia have disrupted India's party. And yeah, some amazing sort of mock-ups of it. I think Daisy Cutter-Zine and have now been taken onto Sky Sports News, having put the Curb Your Enthusiasm music over that particular moment. A very weird end to, I guess, what we can say is quite a weird tournament, I suppose.
Ben, you weren't on the show. Have you got anything that we didn't really cover yesterday?
So we had one question, someone asking, and like, what could India still have done differently with the benefit of hindsight? And if you do have loads and loads of hindsight, I think there's 2 aspects of the game that you'd look at. There's that, especially that Kohli-Rahul partnership, and it is worth stressing that at the time, I don't think people were being overly critical. They were noting it as like, this is unusual for ODI cricket, but I think there's an assumption that these 2 guys are so good that if they're struggling if they're not scoring and not scoring boundaries for such a long period of time, there has to be a reason. But then you look at how Head and Labuschagne played in that partnership, and you wonder, could one of them have just taken some risk? Because they didn't take a single risk that whole partnership. I mean, they took one, and Rahul got 4 off it. You know, he'd scooped 4 down to 5 leg, and that was the only boundary they scored in that whole partnership. That's one thing when you compare that to Australia's things. They could have put some pressure back. And the other thing is Shami taking the new ball, which again at the time you kind of think, okay, I can see the thinking. He's got this brilliant record against left-handers. Defending a smallish total, you feel like early wickets are going to be absolutely crucial. He has been the bowler of the tournament, so you go with him with a new ball. But I think, firstly, that made Siraj's role unclear. Like, if he's not bowling with a new ball, kind of what is his role in that bowling attack? it's also not just the easiest thing just to chuck someone a brand new white ball and says, here, go and take loads of wickets with it. And
It was
Shami,
the first time that he opened the bowling all competition.
yeah, and his seam position is so ridiculously good that I think that was working against him. Like, he was getting so much movement through the air because that seam is always coming out completely bolt upright, that it was going, for spraying for wides on the leg sides. Even the ball that he got Warner with would have been a wide had he left it. And yeah, he's so good with that 10 overs old ball, and he actually didn't get to bowl with that. Those are the two things from India. But I think if you're an India fan, I don't know if it's consolation or not, but Australia in so many departments just played the absolute game of their lives. I mean, Pat Cummins had the captaincy game of his life, from the toss decision to the bowling changes, one and over at points, to how well everyone fielded, like absolute demons. All the bowling attack, especially Cummins, actually were just barely put a foot wrong. And then Head plays the innings of his life, and Labuschagne plays the perfect supporting hand. I think there's much India can do in the face of that, really. So that's how I saw it, I suppose.
I guess the slowdown in the middle was surprising. The lack of boundaries, obviously striking, but Head and Marsh bowled 4 overs in the middle of that. Only conceded 9 runs. India just didn't take any risk, which I guess was strange. And some people were saying, were they frozen on the big stage? I don't know. We just didn't really see them all tournament in that position where they lost 3 early wickets. Against England, Rohit completely changed how he batted when they lost 3 wickets. So I guess that was always going to be what might happen if they lost 3 early wickets, given what they had to come lower down.
The little moments didn't go their way. Kohli was a bit unfortunate to get out in that fashion, and that was obviously the hinge point of that innings. And Shreyas Iyer, who's been in brilliant form, and I know that there's a sort of smallish question mark against his capabilities, or rather the components of his game against the proper quicks, but another day you just don't nick that, you're just getting going. Travis Head played and missed 4 times in an over, literally, from Bumrah when he went round the wicket, and he was all at sea for the first couple of overs when the ball was, as Ben says, doing plenty. It's always a bit lazy to reduce these things to twists of luck and fate, but that always plays a part in a one-off game. And while India can't have any complaints because the toss ended up working out for them anyway, they'd have batted first, nonetheless, they can look back at those certain moments, and on another day, they just don't go that way for you. Luck is always a part of any showdown between two teams that expect to win, and you couldn't really massively separate them going into the game. They were both in good form, both great momentum. Obviously, India were favourites, but only just. And the little details, they're the ones that will be eating away at the punters now when they look back at it. Rohit again. That's one of the great short innings. 47 in 31 balls on an iffy track against an all-time great seam attack for the format, and in a World Cup final, he just comes out and plays like it's a beer match. And he got carried away, as we said yesterday. And on reflection, if he had his time again, he'd sit on Maxwell because he was already well ahead of the game. Nonetheless, another day, that's literally the only ball that didn't come out the middle of his bat. And another day that lands in the outer somewhere. As it was, Travis Head takes a worldie.
And similar to your point on Rohit, I thought Kohli was on track for a properly great innings, utterly chanceless, going at runner ball when Rahul was striking it for a long period of that innings, actually under 50.
But this is where chance and probability always comes into play. You can't score 100 all the time. And there was a sense of destiny and inevitability around Kohli going into the final, and then when he's a runner ball moving through the innings and then gets past 50, and we know that statistically when he gets past 50 he tends to get past 100, but this is mother cricket and it does what it wants. There's nothing you can do about it.
Yeah, I think your point about Nicks is and how Head got through that initial period is so true. Head didn't do anything well to not nick it, if that makes sense. He was beaten by quite a few deliveries. There's one in-swinger from around the wicket from Shami that basically shaved off stump. That's not really excellent judgment. That just sometimes happens. And yeah, it was almost the opposite.
Head's brilliance is that he never never paused to reflect on any of that. And we spoke about the the momentum shifter shot against Kuldeep yesterday. Well, that again, if there's a scintilla of doubt or second guessing yourself or looking at the broader situation of the game and what's at stake, then you don't play those shots. If you get beat 4 times in a row from Bumrah, then a lot of players would start to think, all right, well, there's one with my name on it, so I'm not going to throw my hands at the next one that's in my arc. Well, Head didn't play like that. Head played pure, untrammeled. It was amazing innings. Amazing innings. And gets better the more you think about it, really.
John asked, my question is about the stadium, which is obviously the biggest and the best. Everyone noticed the Australian fielding in the final. Do you think Australia had a small advantage because they are so used to fielding on huge grounds? Would the Indian side have been better suited to a smaller ground where this fielding advantage is clearly Australia's? Ben, what do you reckon?
It's an interesting point. I mean, but I felt, I guess the fielding was down to they covered the ground really well, but that also just felt more that Australia was just so pumped up. Like, there have been times in this tournament where they have fielded really badly. I don't think they have some very good fielders in this side, but it more just felt that they summoned it for today. Like, I guess maybe it being, maybe they have some more experience in bigger player areas. I think the other issue with the ground is that it's weird because it obviously is the biggest ground, so you just have the final there and it's got the big guy's name on it, so you have to have the final there. But you wondered, would say the Wankhede have been like a more storied venue for this final? Would the atmosphere have been different towards the end there? With it's a really tricky one. I
thought the atmosphere was incredible. I know that there are wider points around the venue, but you sort of forgot it for most of the game because of how well Australia did it quietening the crowd. But the noise they made when India took those early 3 wickets, and actually we didn't really talk about this yesterday, but the job that Labuschagne and Head did to get through that period where the crowd was going berserk, genuinely one of the loudest a cricket ground has probably ever been in the history of the sport. To get through that period with the ball was doing loads, what was extremely impressive.
And Head he wasn't going. I guess that's the contrast to Rohit, is that Head obviously can tee off from ball 1, and he took loads off that first over, didn't he?
He was 10 off 23 at one point.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. He then slows down when he senses that situation needs calming down rather than blasting through, and then he also knows he can catch up. But yeah, it was exceptional in lots of ways, that innings.
Got a great email in from Jeff, who I think summarised the dilemma a lot of English fans had. He writes,
is this Jeff Ando?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good email. Yeah.
He said, as a disappointed England fan, finding a dog in the fight yesterday was tricky. Whilst I usually work on the basis of ABA, anyone but Australia, this natural desire was offset at the start by the thought of how fun it would be to derail the Modi show. At times, the final yesterday felt more like a political rally than a cricket match, whilst the way in which, on the occasion, the event has felt more like a BCCI one rather than an ICC one, has at times been troubling, not least with the wider conversation around the future of cricket, T20 leagues, and how some people fear the global game is becoming a plaything for IPL franchises. Add to this the relative silence at any Australian achievement. Say what you want about the hedge fund granddads, the egg and bacon brigade, they'd have at least applauded had the game been at Lord's. They did, in fairness, applaud the Head 100, which was a relative surprise, I guess. And some of the general organisation around journalist visas, it really did contribute to an unfamiliar feeling of happiness at an Australian victory, not least as Head and Cummins, the scourge of the anti-woke brigade, do come across as decent guys. It goes to show the global game cannot be bought. Bring on the Windies tour and yet another reset. Cheers, Jeff. I think that sums up quite a lot of how I felt about the game as well. Like it was strange, and also not just the wider events in the ground, but also the coverage of it and the coverage of the whole tournament. It's been like, there hasn't really been a space, a very, very public space that all cricket fans can consume genuine criticism of what's going on. Question for you, Phil. Yesterday, I was thinking, obviously, this Australian group of players around about the same age as their English counterparts have been involved in a lot of international cricket, Ashes series and World Cups, etc. over the last decade or so. And I think, to me, it feels like there's a difference in the relationships the groups of players have with playing for their countries. And I wonder if that made an impact at all over the last years. I mean, Stark, for example, one of the most highly sought after white ball players in the world, hasn't played in the IPL since 2015. Pat Cummins didn't play in the IPL this year because he knew it was coming up. Adam Zampa pulled out of the IPL a couple of years ago. And partly because of when their home summer is, their really, really big name players don't play in the B tier leagues. And Australia have had this brutal year in terms of international commitments. And it does seem that their management has an easier job of getting their big players to play when they want to compared to England. And I don't think that's on the management necessarily. I think that actually comes from what the players want to do. And it's an interesting comparison because when you compare England to, say, New Zealand, when the players are being paid differently to central contracts, you can say the players have different decisions to make. Whereas England and Australia is broadly comparable what the players earn. So I think you can compare the decision making. What do you make of that?
Oh, it's an intriguing theory, and there may well be something in it. It's a hard thing to prove, and I don't think this conversation would even be worth having 3 or 4 years ago. But clearly the relationship between the top echelon of England players and their paymasters has changed. The dynamic has shifted, and the power has shifted as well. Certainly away from the paymasters towards the players. Is there a deeper connection to playing for your country for average Australian cricketers compared to average England cricketers? Now, I can't make that connection necessarily. What I would say, and you sprung this on me a little bit, but it's a really interesting idea. It's worth a little bit more interrogation, maybe after a breather. One thing I would say is that the presence of the big beasts of Australian cricket down the years, the lineage of Australian cricket from, if you like, of those who are still around, from Ian Chappell to Border through to the 90s, through the war era, the Warne era, and now the very prominent presence of trenchant, passionate figures from Ponting to Langer up until recently. Hayden is very present, very much a part of
the conversation, at least. The
conversation and the culture of Australian cricket is very, very clearly defined in perhaps a way that it's not quite as defined. It's more, perhaps it's a bit more fragmented in England. And you certainly don't have, correct me if I'm wrong, but you don't have the sense that there are big players from the past in an England shirt who are bearing down on the current crop, who have any kind of real influence over the decisions that they make.
It's very deferential, I think, in comparison to how the Australians are.
Indeed.
I don't think it's one way is necessarily right or wrong, but in Australia, it's big dogs saying you got to play for the baggy green, whatever.
Right.
Whereas in England, it's like, oh, actually, they've got lots of options that we didn't have. I'd love to have had those options as a player. Fair enough that they're safeguarding their financial future.
Well, I think also
exactly that.
English cricket also just have a complicated relationship with the IPL, which I think feeds into how English cricket views itself, and you can contrast how Australian cricket views itself. I think when stuff is going wrong in English cricket, they'll look to somewhere else in the world. You know, who can we copy? Can we be more like Australia with fewer teams, or do our players need to go and play in the IPL and learn from the best in the business? And can we do what someone else is doing to have made a really good team? Whereas it feels like when stuff is going wrong for Australia, they sort of think, how can we get back to the Australian way, sort of thing, you know? And again, not saying which one of those is right or wrong. And
well, one is historically a little bit more successful than the other.
That's true, but then I guess England would they might point to the 2019 World Cup win as an example of, but then they pioneered that themselves to an extent, but they might say that those players learnt what they did overseas. But it feels like that, you know, going back to Kevin Peterson, that there has long been this conflicted thing, like should our players be going and playing over there? Should they be playing in England? Also because it clashes with the English season, that's made that relationship even more tense at times. But it also feeds into how English cricket views itself, I think, because they are looking outside for answers and looking to pull something from somewhere else. Whereas Australia will be like, they would probably be saying, like, they would have said that the Big Bash was, you know, the second best T20 league in the world for quite a long time, even when it was pretty clear that it wasn't, because that's just how Australian cricket views itself, basically.
There's also a deeper connection between the great Australian cricketers and the great Australian public. The line is shorter and the relationship is deeper and more significant, more symbolic as well. the days of the England cricket captain having, in air quotes, the second hardest job in the country after the Prime Minister, no one says that anymore.
When do you reckon that was last even possible to say in public?
Good question. A long, long time ago. Cricket now in England, is a fixation and obsession for our beautiful band of brothers and sisters, some of who listen to this show, but it's not a part of the national conversation in the ways that it is in Australia. If you take the sandpaper story, you cannot imagine the sort of collective moral inverted collapse and the sort of months of hand-wringing over in this country. It would be implausible, totally implausible. Whereas in Australia, it became an absolute keynote issue of their own sporting and therefore cultural and national identity. So I guess there is perhaps, going on your theory, there is perhaps another element there that you feel perhaps slightly more tied to the fabric of it, and therefore it's slightly trickier to unstitch yourself from it.
I guess there have been a few examples where I just can't really imagine Australia, things happening to Australia that have happened to England. So, for example, I just cannot imagine Steve Smith choosing to play in a T20 league that didn't exist 6 months ago over playing for Australia. In the literal comparison, in Pat Cummins has signed a contract to to be essentially contracted past the next Ashes series, something that Ben Stokes was offered and didn't accept. It just has been smoother in dealing with the new competition in franchise leagues for Australia than it has for England.
Yeah, and Ben's point about the different relationships with the IPL is an important one, really, because England players felt like they were playing catch up for a long time, and there was a sense of grievance, really, and it obviously was changing by the time Buttler and Stokes, in particular, were at their most marketable, bankable point in their careers. Nonetheless, in the early years, there wasn't that feeling at all, and there was a real problem there, and some of the seeds of the relationship between the board and the players were sown in those years. Whereas with Australia, they're big boys. I mean, Hayden played in the first iteration, he played for Chennai. And Shane Watson played as well. And players who were still good cricketers in their mid-30s, obviously Watson would have been younger at the time. Warren played in the first one. They embraced it straight away. And I was thinking about that when we were watching the game yesterday, and how that sort of outsized, outlandish spectacle of cricket in India with its mad pressure points. Well, these players, they've all trod the boards. Perhaps not literally every single one in that. Maybe Travis Head's only played a bit of IPL, but they've all played it. They're all embedded in that sort of outsized universe of the IPL, right? So it's perhaps not so discombobulating when you find yourself in that sort of pressure.
Moving on to our general reflections on the tournament overall, we'll pick our moments and stories of the tournament in a second. Ben, I just wanted to get your views on the tournament in general. Phil said the other week that it's actually been a pretty good World Cup. And I definitely think that some of the reaction in England has been overly negative, in part because of how bad England were. And that naturally clouds your judgment of a tournament. What do you reckon?
Well, I guess when you get, the best 10 teams in the world and have them play lots of cricket over 7 weeks, you're going to get memorable games, you're going to get stories. Cricket is good enough that you kind of can put it into any sort of format, and you can, do whatever you like sort of with the scheduling and the organisation, and good stuff will still happen, I think. But I guess it felt like that was happening in spite of the organisation and the scheduling rather than because of. I mean, we were really, I think you almost get like fooled over the course of the tournament into thinking that like there is more jeopardy than there is. You have to really kind of like almost like convince yourself that there is, like if this team wins this and if this team wins this, when actually as soon as Australia, in brilliant fashion, but as soon as they won that game against Afghanistan, and even, that would have been a huge upset had it happened, that almost, sewed things up to an extent, and then New Zealand go and smash Sri Lanka. It got better as well as it went on, I think. Like, it had a really tricky opening. Obviously, you had the dud opening game in terms of it not having the hosts. And then, especially those first few weeks, you had the dichotomy between the crowds for India games and the lack of crowds for the others. And then, as the tournament went on, you had, crowds for generally pretty good for all the games. And you wonder if they'd give themselves, a month longer to plan it and to sell those tickets, and they'd, just got themselves organised a bit sooner, if it could have been like that from the start. But I don't think
a big part of that was the venues they chose, that they didn't
That's true
have,
as well, yeah.
they didn't have that many games in the traditional big cricketing powerhouses in India, in terms of Mumbai, Chennai, Kolkata, Bangalore didn't have games in the first half of the competition.
For me, it's a what might have been tournament. When we had that conversation that you just referenced, it was in the midst of a good week, and it was a good week that we needed. And we actually had that conversation during the Afghanistan game, when it looked like Afghanistan were going to win it. And if they had, then it would have opened up that part of the tournament for the next few days. The other hinge game was the South Africa-Pakistan game that South Africa got over the line and won by 1 wicket. First close game. If Pakistan had won that, then again, it would have opened it up. If England hadn't stunk the place out to an almost inexplicable degree, then they would have been a part of the mix as well. There's been a lot of moaning and complaints about the format. I didn't mind the format personally. I didn't mind it. I think if teams had turned up as they should have done, if they'd played to their potential or even somewhere close, then it would have been a bit more varied. The format didn't get the performances to give it enough support. It's not an ideal one because there's only 10 bloody teams in it, right? But considering there are only 10 teams, then I didn't mind that format personally. I would have preferred a few more double hit games because 6 or 7 weeks is a long time to hold anyone's interest. But I didn't mind that as much as other people did. We were talking about it in the pub actually on Friday night, and a couple of people who love their cricket were saying no, I couldn't stand it. But I think so much of it flows from how your lot get on. And it applies in football World Cups as well, right? You know, you can all be a big football fan, but as soon as your team goes out in the quarterfinals or the second round, then some of your attention drains away with it. And that, clearly England were done after 2.5 weeks, effectively done, of a 7-week tournament. Now, it's going to be very difficult for people whose allegiances are for that team to keep going with it. The other reason I say it was a nearly tournament is that it didn't quite have a great final. The final wasn't a particularly memorable game. It didn't have a great Indian innings, and it didn't have a great Indian bowling spell. You know, it had a very, very complete Australian performance. But if you'd taken India for 7 weeks into that game and Australia performing as they did, then it would have been a humdinger. It would have been an incredible game of cricket. As it was a nearly game of cricket. And that's been the story of the whole tournament. For me, the point about the Indianness of it is a separate point. It will have its footnote when this tournament comes to be thought about in years to come. But I think there's various different things going on there. But yeah, it's not a classic. It's not a classic, no.
Yeah, I think a big part of it for me is the format. I think there's too many games, even if, first of all, we didn't have many good games in the first half of the competition. Although a point on this, I think we've got a little bit too greedy about what is a good game. I think you can have a game that doesn't have a close finish, but that can still be a very fun watch for a lot of it.
But the format's got nothing to do with there not being close games in the first.
No, sorry, that's a separate point. Other point is that when you do get interesting results, so South Africa beating Netherlands, for example, there's just not enough on it because there's so much to go. So individually, that's a great result that will hook people in.
But that would have had an impact because South Africa, if they hadn't beaten Pakistan in that one, which could have gone either way, that would have had a significant impact.
I guess if they'd lost.
Why was that? Why was that not impactful in a way that it would have been in a different format?
South Africa could have lost 2 more games and still quite easily have qualified for the last 4.
I feel like teams that are losing 4 games shouldn't really be in with a chance of winning a World Cup. I think basically like that just feels like a weird format, and that's because of the playing 9 games in the group stage. That is unheard of in other World Cups, I think.
But if you have 14 teams, as we're going to have next time, you can afford to lose even more.
Well, no, I guess probably not, because you're going to only have 3 teams from each group go through. So. And probably 2 groups of 7. I don't think they're going to do a 14-team round robin. I mean,
no. They'll be doing the Super 6 thing, presumably, right?
Yeah. So 2 groups of 7, top 3 from each group qualify for the Super 6s, and you play the teams that you haven't already played in the Super 6s.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So yeah, it's the percentage of chances then. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I mean,
so you can lose 40% of your games and still win a World Cup.
Yeah. I think if we're doing it quickly, my ideal World Cup would actually be 20 teams, 4 groups of 5, top 2 go through to quarterfinals, and then you do have something that can legitimately call itself a World Cup. I think if you look at the qualifier, you have teams that will be able to put up performances against good teams, if not quite threaten results, and you'll have enough jeopardy there that, you know, the likes of Scotland can pull off a result against Bangladesh. They'd have a shot at the quarters, or you'd have, you know, I think that for me would be the right balance between a tournament with some heft and some length, which in the way that 4 groups of 4 might not quite have, but that also gives teams maybe a chance to recover from one bad day, but that equally doesn't allow the team to, you know, have a player like as much as the head story is amazing. It's ridiculous that a guy can break a bone in the thing that holds the main piece of cricket equipment, you know, just before the tournament, and then still be picked in the squad for the tournament, and then can be almost a player of the tournament. That tells you that the World Cup is maybe a bit too long, possibly. I don't know.
Yeah, I actually quite like the format for 2027. I think that's a good mix of both worlds.
I agree. I like that's the best format out there for me. I like the Super Six idea. I like the jeopardy that exists early on in the group stages, because say compare again to football, you know, in the Champions League basically which teams are going to go through, but that big hitter game between the top two, the ordained top two, has jeopardy and relevance. You know, so I really like that format. I think 20 teams for a 50 over World Cup, when each game takes eight hours, and you're complaining that it's too long a tournament anyway. 20 teams, that's a lot. It's a lot of cricket when only a tiny percentage of those 20 can legitimately win the thing. Anyway, that's for another day.
Moving on to our moments and stories of the World Cup. Phil, do you want to go first?
I don't really have a story.
Okay.
We've sort of touched on it, really. The contraction of the World Cup has been the story for years, and it felt small. The story is those who weren't there. The game's never felt like it's in with a better chance of being big, globally big, and you see it with the advancement of Afghanistan. You saw it with the way that Zimbabwe played in the last T20 tournament. You saw it with some of the cricket that Scotland have been playing, and some of the cricket that Ireland have obviously been playing, and none of them are there. To not have the West Indies there, for me, seems just cosmically wrong. And so for me, there were a lot of ghosts that weren't in that tournament, not least England. So that's its overriding story, and thankfully we'll never get there again. You know, if we contract it again, then, you know, we can all give up. So there is that at least, and that feeds into the slight sort of whiff of cynical management around this tournament that bleeds into certain points that have already been made here and elsewhere about the slightly myopic nature of this tournament. But that's a side point. My moment is the class.
Sorry. Just on that, I saw a great stat today. If you go across the last 3 World Cups, from 2015 to 2023, which obviously includes one of them that England won, Ireland have a better win-loss ratio than England.
That is beautiful. Beautiful.
Sorry, Phil, your moment of the tournament.
And my moment is the Class 100 in the context of that game, England's decision to put them in, and seeing this 11, this England team, which is basically the same as that which won it 4 years ago, with a few bits around the edges, physically wilting on our TV screens and in the flesh, as Klaassen, one of the form players and kind of symbol, if you like, modern South Africa as well, played one of the innings of his life. And you saw South Africa announce themselves in this World Cup, just as you saw England basically check out. And I watched all of that game. It was on a Saturday, and I was bang up for it. I didn't have anything to do that day, so I was settling in, and I was thinking, right, this is when England start playing desperate cricket, start making their point. The coin went up. We were already on the messages before a ball had been bowled. What the hell's going on here? 38 degrees, whatever it was. That Class 100 was not only as good 100 as you saw in the tournament, Maxwell's included, but it symbolised a real shift between a team that not many fancied and against a team that most people fancied. And by half time, England's tournament was done. And then Klaassen just sat there like a Roman emperor for the rest of it, with a towel around his midriff.
Pretty much the ideal way to go. My moment of the tournament also involves South Africa from around that phase of the tournament. It's actually their defeat against the Netherlands. It's amazing. If you look at the final table, you can really split the tournament. And I think this is actually one of the reasons, and Phil sort of touched on this a couple of minutes ago, why the tournament wasn't as good as it could have been, was there was such a disparity between the top teams and the underperforming teams that we sort of fancied it had a chance to qualify for the Final Four at least, and the bottom. So India, the only team they lost against all tournament was Australia. The only teams that Australia lost against all tournament were India and South Africa. And South Africa lost against India, Australia, and the Netherlands. So the only team that disrupted the top three, who were the clear top three all tournament, were the Dutch, who the only non-full member at this competition. I think for them to get a victory, not against any full member, but one of the genuine contenders for the title, was amazing, and a bit of a middle finger to the format when this format was envisaged. A team like the Netherlands getting to the 10-team World Cup was not something that I think was part of the plan. So I think that was an amazing moment.
And also, just it's worth dwelling on the fashion of that win as well. Like Netherlands were 140 for 7. You know, they were out of the game. You know, that game was, we're thinking, all right, early finish. Let's kind of clock off early, and then like a brilliant counter attack that kind of happens in the space of about like 11 overs, and then a bowling performance that just doesn't give them room to breathe. In the end, it's not even close, with South Africa having been so far ahead of the game. It was kind of absurd, really.
My story of the tournament is the injuries. I think, again, one of the things that hampered the tournament was the loss of some of the best and most exciting players in the world. Who knows what Pakistan's tournament could have looked like if they had Naseem Shah opening the bowling every game. Sri Lanka, who missed out on the Champions Trophy, no Wanindu Hasaranga for the entirety of the tournament. England were obviously rubbish for many reasons, but Jofra Archer not being part of it, definitely a factor. Anrik Nortje not being involved probably opened the door for Gerald Coetzee, who's brilliant, but again, he's one of the fastest bowlers in the world. That was a huge miss. And obviously for India, Hardik Pandya is a massive miss for them. And we were worried that the absence of Head would have been a big deal for Australia. In the end, I guess he showed that had the injury been a bit more severe, that would have been a huge deal. So yeah, it's not, I guess, an individual story, but I do think that this tournament was disproportionately affected by the number of injuries to key figures in the white ball game at the moment.
Totally that. Sri Lanka were not really ever going to stand a chance when they lost essentially their two most effective players. And the loss of Naseem Shah, described by Sean Tate in our magazine as the best young fast bowler he'd ever seen in his life, can't overestimate the impact that had on Pakistan. Pakistan became a sort of psychodrama on its own terms. I think Saj is going to talk to you about it later on in the show. But that's the biggest disappointment of the lot. England, you could have seen it coming, I suppose. But Pakistan, it being in India, the proximity of those two, and everybody was wanting them to leave their mark just for the drama. And so, yeah, it was quite painful, really, for the neutral to see them fall flat.
Ben, your moment and story.
Yeah, well, so my story, and it's because I was trying to think about this, and obviously you do have the spectacular implosions, especially in Pakistan, England, and Sri Lanka, but those do feel like there are reasons for those that you can kind of explain. The one thing that I was thinking that like just couldn't have seen coming at all is just the overperformance of Afghanistan to come into this tournament, their only World Cup victory being against Scotland, and then to start off how they did with that defeat against Bangladesh. You're looking at that and you're thinking, actually, that is a scrap for even a team who can be theoretically in semi-final contention at one point, and whichever team loses that, you think they can't have a hope, basically. And Afghanistan were awful in that game, and you think like, well, this is a team who, you know, we know they've got promise, but I guess this World Cup, they've just got this mental block there. They can't figure out how to win World Cup games. And then England turn up, and Rahman Gurbaz plays that astonishing assault, opening the batting, and they
tragically run out by his captain as well.
Yeah, and then they spin circles around them, and all of a sudden the switch is flicked, and they're brilliant from that point onwards until Glenn Maxwell starts getting cramp, and then the semi-final run finally comes to an end. But for a team like even the whole Afghanistan story is obviously complex but magnificent in some ways. Even just the cricketing thing of a team that has had this, becomes like a shadow of itself on the biggest stage, to suddenly string together this extraordinary run of form, and with also not in the way that anyone had anticipated him doing. The openers were good, and Gurbaz obviously started it off, but to find a middle order, like a whole middle order mid tournament, and for them to be just stringing together these like incredibly complete, assured batting performances that we just had no idea that this team could produce. And then there's everything else about Afghanistan cricket as well. So yeah, that was a story for me. And then the moment is the innings that ended that whole run, which is the Maxwell thing. And I was thinking that at that stage in a World Cup, obviously we were clinging desperately to some hope of a semi-final race, but it's been such a long time, and it's the relentlessness of the game after game each day, and you're feeling like, can cricket ever sort of supply anything new in a way? And then and then a guy comes out and he's like, there's lots of things you can take out of that innings, I think, and it still be one of the greatest innings ever played, right? If he'd made 120 not out rather than 201 not out, or if he hadn't been like unable to walk and had just had the shots and the actual score details of what he did, versus the fact that he like had to just stand there and swing and yet was still connecting with everything and sending it a million miles beyond the rope each time, that made you think like, wow, that was something properly special and astonishing and like nothing I've seen before that just happened. And yeah, so that's why that was the moment of the tournament for me.
On Afghanistan, Joe had a chat with Jonathan Trott after the tournament ended. It's a genuinely fascinating conversation. I think Trott's devotion to his players really comes across, and you can see how he's made such a positive impact on that relatively young and inexperienced group. But before we go to that, Phil, there are some really good offers out there for people who like reading about cricket.
Yeah, there is. So Fairfield Books is the book publisher that we are all aligned to, and they've produced a number of excellent publications in the last couple of years. Perhaps the most prominent one is Being Geoffrey Boycott, written by Geoffrey Boycott himself and John Houghton. It's literally a unique collaboration. Boycott revisits all 108 of his test matches, and John Houghton writes the internal monologue of what he imagines Boycott would have been going through. With Boycott's acceptance, by the way. They've become an odd couple, but good friends. Anyway, Being Geoffrey Boycott is part of the Fairfield staple. That's available through them, but they've published various other prominent books, award-winning books. Who Only Cricket Know by David Woodhouse, about the Hutton tour of the Caribbean in the early 50s, an extraordinary tour politically, socially, and on the field as well. That cleaned up at the awards last year. That's still under the Fairfield banner. Moeen Ali's children's book, The Legend of Sparkhill, written along with Tanya Aldred. That's also a part of Fairfield. And they, of course, run subscription offers for good old Wisden Cricket Monthly and the Nightwatchman as well, which we mentioned a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, what are we? A month or so out from Christmas. So get onto the Fairfield website. It's at the nightwatchman.net website. We'll put the details in the show notes at the bottom. You can save between a £5 and £100, depending on how much you want to buy. And it's all really good stuff. Perfect Christmas present fodder for people. Go to the first class reading section of the nightwatchman.net. And you'll find something that will tickle your fancy. And
we'll leave a link to that in the description. Anyway, here is that chat that Joe had with Jonathan Trott.
So Jonathan, when you spoke to Mel Farrell for us before the World Cup, I think you said your aim was for Afghanistan to compete in every game and get yourselves into positions to win games. With 4 wins in the tournament, beating England and Pakistan along the way, do you feel like you actually surpassed those expectations and aims?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you'd said, I remember speaking to Mel, I think we were just at the Asia Cup, and obviously disappointed the way the Asia Cup went, which leads into the World Cup for all those sides. It happens just before, and we got knocked out on net run rate basically, or to that effect. And so the disappointment of that, and I would have taken the 4 victories. Yes, I would have snapped your hand off probably at the end of the Asia Cup for the World Cup. If you included England, Pakistan in those victories as well, then it's a very successful. But I still can't help but feel we maybe left a few games out there. The Australia game certainly, which is one that'll sting for a while.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the Australia game. Obviously, you guys were strong favourites at one stage. Is there frustration in not seeing the game through, or given the way that Maxwell played, you just have to throw your hands up and say, you were on the receiving end of one of the all-time great ODI knocks.
Yeah, if we hadn't dropped him twice, then I'd be able to say it's a good knock. And I think we sort of seen highlights and here and there, and we did actually we bowled sort of. I mean, could we have done anything differently? And I think we tried most things. I think it's just a great another learning curve for our guys with regards to the game and how quickly this game can change. Certainly, where we need to improve in finishing games, but also the mentality and the strength and mentality you need with regards to being resilient when things don't go your way or there's a drop catch, is to be able to pull yourselves out of that sort of disappointment and carry on with the game.
But across the tournament, what aspects of the team's performance were you most pleased, most impressed by?
I think the way that our batting improved as the tournament went on. There were times, I think, with the bat where we probably got a little bit stuck. In the South Africa game, the last game, I don't think we lost 3 wickets in 3 overs, and those are the type of things we sort of focused on, not losing wickets in clusters. The real basics and those things we improved at. I thought the way that we chased, whenever I speak to anybody about before I took over or when I took over, it was always we bat first and then, over to our spinners to win us the game. And I was a bit uncomfortable with that because I saw the potential in, certainly if knowing the World Cup and conditions where if we bowl first and the ball's dry, our spinners can be a bit more effective, whether the pitch is spinning or not, whether it spins later, but with a wet ball, it's not going to spin. So we need to be able to chase scores. We need to have the mentality where we can chase scores. We need to have the self-belief to chase scores. And again, that's why I refer to the Asia Cup where we needed to chase 292 or 282 in 37.1, and we nearly did it. To score nearly 300 in 37 overs for Afghanistan is under that type of pressure in that situation. So that's what gave me the confidence that we weren't far away. And I said a few times before the tournament, we just need to win 1 or 2 games. Those tight games. And I think the England victory did that, and certainly the Pakistan game kicked us on certainly a lot as well. So very pleased with that and becoming perhaps a more all-round side, I would say. Being able to win with the bat chasing and being able to set up games like we did against Australia and should have won that game as well.
Yeah, it's noticeable the wins against Pakistan and Sri Lanka particularly, they were potentially tricky chases, which in the end, Afghanistan made look very comfortable. You personally had a good record when chasing down totals in your ODI career. Was that something you spoke a lot about with the players, to how to manage and how to control a chase?
No, I think, I'm very hesitant to coach people coach them the way that I played or tell them to play the way I played. I think your job as a coach is to be adaptable to whoever you're coaching and see the strengths that they have and perhaps add to those strengths, but also help them work on their weaknesses. What I will try to do is just give them a bit of to add to their natural talent, which is in abundance, is try and give them a little bit of a structure and a little bit of focus. All right, well, if I'm training, how am I going to train? I need to put myself under pressure in training. I think training before I arrived was seen as a bit of something that you just do because you feel like you have to, so you don't feel guilty when the game comes. I see training as an opportunity to improve and make sure that when you step over that line, you're ready for whatever questions are going to be thrown at you. And the only time we ever really only get nervous as players or as people is when you're unsure of what's going to happen, or you don't have the answers for what's about to happen. If you have the answers, straight away you feel calmer. And I think that's what we're seeing in the players. They're a lot more calmer. They're a lot more clearer in how they're going to go about this run chase. And when batting first, it's almost okay, well, to get 300, we don't have to be 100 off the 10 overs. Because the Afghanistan are so used to playing T20 cricket that hitting boundaries is second nature. And a lot of my conversations with them has been, all right, you can hit boundaries, that's great. But what we do in between those 6s and 4s. And there's still games now where during games now where we'll hit a 6 and we'll still only score 7 off that over or 6 off that over. So those are the little areas. I think a lot of the time, I think they quite enjoy things being pointed out or being shown to them. I think nowadays also younger people, certainly the guys that I'm working with, they're very visual. And it's very weird now. You've got to almost have proof before they believe you. Younger people, it's sort of like, well, this is going to happen. This is from my experience here, but then you actually also got to show them a little bit. If you do this, this will happen. And here's evidence of it. So that's interesting side of coaching and coaching younger players and making sure that I'm not, this is the way I played, this is the way we played, this is the way I was taught, so this is how we have to do it. It's sort of like, and with the culture and with the upbringings and all, there's a whole melting pot of things that you have to get right with the players or with the side to make progress.
Ibrahim Zadran made Afghanistan's first World Cup century in that Australia defeat. In him and Ramona Gurbaz, you've got a really impressive, exciting opening pairing, both only 21, already got brilliant records in the 50 over format. Good can those two go on and become?
Well, yeah, it's really interesting, like the two of them and very different characters, similar ages, but very different in characters. Similar in talent as well, but different types of talent. Ibrahim Zadran, very studious, very quiet, very methodical, professional. Great athlete, works hard at games, thinks a lot about it in that sort of way. Where Gurbaz is, and I've said this, probably one of the most talented young players I've ever seen. If he just had a little bit of what Ibrahim has, and perhaps if Ibrahim had a bit of the bold and brashness that Gurbaz has, if you could, just sort of amalgamate the two, you'd have something close to Virat Kohli. But in talent-wise and work ethic and dedication to the game and focus and professionalism and that sort of stuff, you'd have a real monster in your hand. But that's the interesting thing for me as a coach is, those two guys, I enjoy working with them immensely, along with all the others. But I think those two, they can be as good as they want to be, I think, with regards to that and their focus on T20 and 50 over or Test match cricket. It's, they could be as good as they want to be in all three formats. And so my job as a coach and us as coaching staff is to enable them to do that. So I feel like with Gurbaz there's still a lot more. I think with Ibrahim we're getting close to what he can do. I think there's still areas to improve on all of that. But with Gurbaz, I don't think it's as much as a technical thing or a cricketing thing. I think it's a case of just method, really.
You've been in the job for over a year now. I wondered, has it played out as you thought it would? Have there been some surprises along the way?
I didn't know much about it going into it. I asked, I got feedback from a lot of people, asked a lot of questions for people who'd been in the past, who'd worked with the players, who'd worked with Afghanistan, things that they had learned, advice, those sorts of things. So I did speak to people and I did a lot of homework once awarded the job and the challenge. Yes, there's been a lot of growing pains, I think, as well, is fair to say, on and off the field. But I think you're going to get that in developing nations and cricketing developing nations as well. That you're going to have those sorts of pains. But seeing the guys against England, seeing them beat Pakistan, seeing them beat Sri Lanka, we've played a lot of cricket against them, sort of lost, and we've won a few, but lost more than we've probably won against them. But to see the way we played against them in a World Cup, but also let's not forget the win against the Netherlands. They were 70 for one after maybe 15 overs or 14 overs, I can't remember, and we still pulled the game back. We pulled the game back through our fielding. We had 3 run-outs and a great stumping. So we've seen this World Cup. We've seen the emergence of a lot of talented players and guys step up. Noor Ahmed's come to the fore in his own right. Lots of work there to be done. Ikram, the keeper, stepped in and taken over the gloves, and I thought he kept him brilliantly. And so we've certainly discovered a few new players, but a few new players will take a lot of confidence away from the World Cup, I should say, which is encouraging. And I almost feel like, whereas before we had maybe 10 or 11, we had 9 or 10 certainties, we can pick from more players, which is only shows the strength of the side. And whereas before you're trying to find the right combinations, now it's almost like, well, what combinations are we going to choose, if you know what I mean?
Yeah. Does it feel strange being head coach of a country that you've never been to and possibly, I guess, might never visit?
Yeah, I think it's very unique. I think also the fact that we constantly always play all our cricket in Abu Dhabi or training camps in Abu Dhabi. It's, Abu Dhabi cricket have been brilliant with us, and we're very thankful for the hospitality that they afford the players. Yeah, it's a real conundrum, really. I think it's the same as when Pakistan played in Dubai and UAE for ages themselves. It's unfortunate how it is and the circumstances that the team finds itself. And I think that only shows the strength, of the players, how they've grown over the last couple of years, I suppose, since it's been happening. that they can still go out and compete. And they're always playing an away series. They never get to play at home. A lot of the teams create strength by having a good record at home. You go and play Australia. No, they don't really lose much there. You go play India, they don't lose there. So you don't have that in your back pocket, the sort of home field advantage all the time. So that what makes the World Cup even more pleasing. But yeah, it's less than ideal.
There are some who've argued that given the political situation in Afghanistan and the fact that there isn't an Afghanistan women's team, that Afghanistan shouldn't hold full membership status. Does that noise get through to the players? Does it affect the players in any way? Is it a conversation topic?
Yeah, I'm no politician, man. I don't know. I don't speak to the players, the PLAs. I don't know. I don't really have an answer for that, if I'm honest. Sorry.
That's okay. And is the situation in Afghanistan something that's discussed much in the dressing room at all between players, or is it just
the guys are very wary of what's going on. Certainly when we had the earthquake, we had just arrived in Delhi, and straight away the guys were wanting to know what they could do for the situation.
Yeah.
I know Rashid Khan donated all of his match fees. The guys started fund sort of pages on social media for people to help them out from around the world. I know the ACB players donated, and the ACB then made a donation, making sure the money got where it needs to go. So the players are very attuned, and they're obviously very much aware of the joy and the happiness that they've brought the players. The players that have brought the country.
Yeah.
And the smiles, not only for their families, but people they don't know, people that are going through hard times and perhaps have been unfortunate with the earthquake disaster and, amongst other things. So the guys are very attuned to what's going on, and they know they're not just playing for the 15 or 18 that they were there, or the coaching staff. They're playing for a lot more than that.
Yeah. You mentioned that these players obviously had a very different upbringing to your own and to most of the cricketers that you'll have played with and against across your career. Has that brought any kind of cultural challenges as a coach and overseeing their progress?
Yeah. I think for sure that a lot of the players these players were born in just while they were displaced. Their families were in sort of refugee camps because of the war that was going on at the time when they were born. So as a coach, you've always got to take that into account when you chatting to players. I mean, one of the players I'd just taken over the job at World Cup, and one of the players said he hadn't spoken to his sister for a couple of days because she was trying to cross the border with her 2 daughters or 2 kids. So, that certainly isn't on your level 3 and 4 when they're coaching with the ECB. You do your coaching badges. So there's lots of things to learn on the fly, and when making a decision or deciding to do something, there's so much other stuff that you and I perhaps or perhaps the readers would never have experienced themselves to take into account.
Yeah.
That's the biggest learning thing for me, but also realizing just how resilient these guys are is actually a thing to behold in itself. So there's lots of other things I could say, but I don't think it's good for publication. Things that you learn, things that you hear about, things that you not witness, but the players have witnessed, that sort of stuff. So the guys realize who they're playing for and what they're playing for very much, and then that's a true credit to them.
I saw on social media they got you up dancing after the England win. Maybe a bit the way you celebrated a win in the England changing room. That
was after the Pakistan. I've never
seen
scenes like it. Yeah, that was a Pakistan win, and I think Chennai's got a great change room. It's a new change room, and out the back they were in the eating area. I've never seen Rashid Khan. Rashid Khan, who has played in IPL finals and lots of games and big games. For him, I've never seen a guy more happy or more overcome with emotion and passion. In those videos. So I walked in there trying to get something to eat. And the next thing I was getting pulled and dancing, and it just felt great to be able to share that with them. And I think they enjoyed it. I think they enjoy the fact that I care about their success and their happiness. I think they really appreciate somebody trying to understand where they come from, what they're about. What's their drivers, what sort of makes them tick a little bit, instead, and sort of and always know that the door is always open for a conversation, and that as a coach, I think there is a sort of player coach relationship, but my door is always open whether they want to have a talk about cricket or they want to talk about anything else, or that sort of stuff, that I'm approachable and that I care about them. I think is the most important thing that they. And so when I get to dance or have to dance, that's important that they get that moment to remember, and I'll certainly remember it as well. So, I'll never forget it.
And what are your hopes for the team over the next couple of years? I guess these things are out of your hands to an extent, but is more Test cricket something you'd like to see played for Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think there's a few tests scheduled, before Easter. So we'll just have to see how the fixtures play out. There's nothing announced as certain, but it's in the schedule. My contract's obviously up end of the year, so we'll just have to see how that plays out. So I'm sort of sitting here now waiting, seeing how things pan out. And obviously I thoroughly enjoy coaching the side. Hopefully, there's lots more for the side, a lot more success for the side.
Brilliant. Cheers, Jonathan. I think that's great. Thanks so much for your time.
Yeah, no worries.
Our Wisden Photograph of the Year competition opens for entries this coming Friday. Keep your eyes peeled for announcements on our social media channels. Taking part is totally free and open to all photographers, amateur or professional, all around the world. The only stipulations are that images must have a cricketing theme and be taken during 2023. The best images will appear as the first 3 colour photographs in the 2024 edition of the Wisden Cricketers Almanack. The winner will receive £1,000, while the 2 runners-up will pick up £400 each. Some county news this week. The hugely promising opening batter Ali Orr has moved along the south coast from Sussex to Hampshire. He's 22, averages 14 first-class cricket, already has
really
a list
player.
double hundred to his name. A massive loss for Sussex, who had a decent year in 2023 in the Championship, but a big gain for Hampshire as well, who challenged for the title, but you'd probably say their weakness is top-order runs. If you want to have a look at who the most angriest people on the internet are today, I recommend going on the Sussex Twitter account.
I don't think that's actually the case.
I don't know. I don't know.
Cricket Twitter, maybe.
There's a lot of anger there. And I guess you can understand why losing one of your, most exciting young talents to your local rivals is a pretty big deal. And Orr is really highly rated. He was injured in 2023, so he might have faded in some people's memories. But when people are compiling predicted England 11s for 5 years' time, his name is often.
He's a full package. He might not develop, but for shots all around the park, different formats. Clearly, he's gone to Hampshire because he wants to play red ball cricket in the top tier. It's a pisser for Sussex, but this is the way the game's going, and you can't really knock the lad because he has the kind of components that England will be looking for. He's got an all-round game.
You can't knock him, but I totally get the frustration of Sussex fans because also just because of the general mood at Sussex and because of the sell to their members that this was, they have had such a youth-oriented policy, with kind of the sell being that, look, I know that results might be tough right now, but we are bedding in a team that is going to carry us to glory in 10, 15 years' time. They've even sold these sort of 15-year-long membership packages, which is kind of like an injection of cash that they needed at that time. But it was also coming with, see what followed James Coles all the way through his career, followed Ali Orr, Tom Haynes all the way through his career. And if actually the fact that you're having that youth policy means that you don't have the success right now, means that the young players who are then best then just get picked off by the counties who are having immediate success right now, that is a concern for that model, and I don't quite know.
Of course, it's a concern for the model, but I don't think you can level too much criticism at Sussex's door, right?
No, I guess not. But it's well, I mean, the youth policy was one that they have chosen. Like, they have let go of some good senior players. It's a while ago now, but the likes of Luke Wells.
But if a player is desperate to go, you can't keep them against their will, really.
That's true. I guess Sussex also said that Ali Orr, they were negotiating a contract with him. He wanted to reopen those contract negotiations, I suppose, sensing his own value, and they were unable to come to agreement of it. I don't think it's exactly as if, I guess that don't know yet the completely full story about the transfer, and I guess there's not a way to cling on to him. I suppose it's more fans will look at their general direction and think like, well, what's going to happen to the next Ali, or what's the plan to keep him? And I don't know what there will be if they're going to keep being so youth focused, and that is going to come at the expense of current success, I guess.
Yeah, I guess so. Like a lot of people are quick to say, you know, this is the financial landscape in county cricket is changing in such a way so people are going from inverted commas smaller counties to grounds that host 100 teams, etc. But from a purely cricketing point of view, he's going from a side that don't win many games in Division 2, that won the joint most games in Division 1 last year, who've got a clear spot at the top of the order that's open to take. If you're Hampshire, you're looking for the best young opening batter in Division 2 is Ali Orr. So it makes complete cricketing sense. I completely understand the frustration at Sussex fans, but it's one hell of a signing for Hampshire, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Be frustrated, be angry because you're losing one of your homegrown players, but this is not indicative of a skewed system particularly. You know, cricketers, sports people have always looked to move upwards, and if they can't do it with their own teams, this is not a new phenomenon, really. There's more eye-opening, or there's more of a surprise around something like the Daniel Lawrence story than there is with this one. In brutal truth, right? You know, there's a hierarchy of quality and resources and position in the game.
And you move to a team like Hampshire and you have a really good start to the summer, suddenly you're almost inked in for an England Lions call-up, and you're in the conversation around England in a way that you're just not all the time in Division 2 when you're a young player. You know, especially actually in the last few years, Division 2 has actually seen more high run scoring than Division 1. Anyway, Ash asks, I was hoping for Butcher's views on the reversion to 8 points for a draw in the Championship. No Butch today, but we're more than happy to talk about it. It's obviously the big news of the week. The draw has gone back up to 8 points. It was at 5 points in 2023, so it's gone up to 8, the first available opportunity. Reported by Will McPherson in the Telegraph, who also wrote there will be 4, not 2 rounds of the Championship that uses the Kookaburra ball in 2024. The Kookaburra ball basically stops swinging much earlier than the Dukes does. The thinking in part is because it brings spinners more into the game, because you can't just give the ball to a new ball bowler 50 overs in and expect it to swing as much. Any strong opinions on either of those two stories?
Let's just give Butch a ring.
Well, he's on jury service, so he's not on this one.
I guess I just wish a bit. I don't mind the Kookaburra thing so much. I guess it's also in part because that's the ball they use in Australia. And again, if they do it in Australia, then it has to be pretty good for England, and they're preparing for that tour there. With the point structure and the system of the county championship, there's lots of good arguments for and against every single thing they do. And I wish that every time they changed it, it wasn't that they then look at the arguments against and go, oh, that's a really good idea, let's go back to the old thing. And then the arguments happen again, and then it's like, well, let's do that again. Like, it would be great if we could just stick with something for a few years and see but I guess that's not going to happen in English cricket, I suppose.
I don't like it at all.
Why?
Because it encourages safety first negativity. It makes a virtue out of a form of result which should be a last resort in the modern game. It's meant to be an entertainment. It will encourage teams to not force the issue. It will encourage teams to enjoy a little bit longer in the dressing room when there's a bit of rain around. We've all seen it. It will encourage dead games in the final afternoon when both teams are happy to take 8 points. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think I'm with you. Just looking at the tables last year, Division 2 in particular had a problem with so many draws. So I don't understand why you'd want to incentivise the draw more. So in 2023, only 2 teams in Division 2 won more than 3 games out of 14. There were so many draws. Glamorgan were involved in 2 results all season. Sussex were involved in 4 results all season. Same with Derbyshire. So I don't know how you can look at that and be like, we need to give more points to the draw. We need to incentivise the draw. Ask
your listeners, real county cricket diehards, what they think, because it's a peculiar decision to me, but maybe I'm missing something obvious.
Bit of coaching news this week. Andrew Flintoff has been named as the head coach of the men's Northern Superchargers side. It's his first full-time coaching role.
Well, that's really lovely.
And it's been good just seeing him back involved in English cricket.
I was actually a little bit surprised, but really pleased, because I thought when he came in that it was just to try and, open him back out into the public realm. But it seems like this has always been his first love, where he feels most at ease. And perhaps we're going to see more of this. Perhaps his destiny is actually to end up back in the bosom of his family, which is how he feels about cricket. So it's been really heartening to see. And of course, there'll be a few people who are sniffy about it because it's attached to that tournament. But look, for Fred's rehabilitation and for his happiness, peace of mind, it's a beautiful, lovely thing.
Yeah, it's great to have him back.
Intrigued to how he'll go as a coach as well, to be honest. No reason why he couldn't be a really good one. I think that there's also been a tiny amount of sniffiness about that too. This is someone sort of getting elevated, having, not done his time at, in the Lancashire second 11 or whatever. But I think that not based off much, but it's Flintoff, exactly, right? This is a guy who really understands cricket, who loves it and can sort of get players believing in something and playing in the same way, and will rally a team. I think it'll be really interesting to watch.
Finally, even by Pakistan standards, the last week has been pure chaos. Pretty much every leadership role has changed hands. There have been resignations, surprise sackings, and even more surprising appointments. It's had absolutely everything. Saj Sadiq joined us now to talk about the headline stories from Pakistan. Evening, Saj. Great to have you on. It's been one hell of a week for Pakistani cricket. I'll try and sum it up first. So Babar Azam has resigned as skipper across all three formats, somewhat against his will, according to reports. Shan Masood, who's only just back in the test side, is the 34-year-old new test captain. Shaheen Afridi is the new T20I captain, although he was briefly also announced as the ODI captain, but the PCB quickly deleted a tweet containing that news. The entire coaching staff has been moved on. Mohammad Hafiz is the new director of cricket. Wahab Riaz is the new national selector. Sohail Tanvir is the new junior selector. And then today, Wahab, in his first day in the job, announced a test squad for the tour of Australia. And at the announcement, he publicly criticised Haris Rauf for not committing to the tour over workload fears, with a version of events that Haris Rauf himself reportedly denies. In true Saj, it sounds like a complete shit show. Everything has changed in a week. Shall we start with Babar? What did you make of the call to move him on in white ball cricket and then his call to step back from test cricket?
Well, I think first and foremost, Yas, it's just a quiet week for Pakistan cricket. It's just standard stuff, we're used to all of this. But seriously though, Babar, I think the Asia Cup, he was struggling. The knives were out for him there, having not qualified for the final, and it was a disappointing tournament for Pakistan. The World Cup, he went into the World Cup under a lot of pressure. As I say, the knives are out. There were a number of ex-players criticising him quite a lot. His own batting, and never mind ex-players, some current players were on national television criticising him as well. So, I mean, where else would you get that in the world of cricket, where your teammates are sat on TV criticising you? Only in Pakistan, really. But, I mean, it was a situation where he went into the World Cup, as I say, under a lot of pressure in terms of his leadership, his captaincy, and whether the players were gelled as a unit. And I think he failed in all aspects, really. Yeah, you can look at his numbers. His batting average was about 40. Strike rate wasn't great. His captaincy was abysmal, I thought, throughout the tournament. He looked lost almost. Babar's not a natural leader. He's not an inspirational character. He's not one of those guys who I think could really shake that dressing room up and get his teammates pumped up. But I think he had a particularly bad World Cup as captain. Obviously, they offered him the test captaincy. They said, you can keep that, but we'll take the other two off you. And the report, according to the PCB, is that he discussed it with his family and said, no, you can stick all three where the sun doesn't shine. Whether that is totally accurate or not, I think it'll come out eventually as to what went on behind closed doors regarding Babar Azam. But I'm not entirely surprised that they've removed him as captain.
I guess two big what-if moments in his white ball captaincy. One, if Shaheen Afridi doesn't limp off injured with 4 overs to go in the T20 World Cup, final last year. For me, that game was 50-50 at the point Shaheen goes off, and there's game over by the end of that over that Iftikhar, I think, finishes it. And number 2, Naseem Shah, gun Pakistan opening bowler, looking as good as he's ever looked before, ruled out on the eve of the World Cup. And he was always going to be difficult to replace. There was no one in Pakistani cricket who can really fill that void. What do you think Babar's legacy as captain will be? Because as you say, he was, he reminded me a lot of English captaincy appointments where you're really only giving the guy the job because he's one of the few guys actually guaranteed a spot in the side across formats. Felt very similar to Joe Root getting the job, for example, when there weren't that many alternatives.
I think a major part of his legacy will be the fact that when he was captain, his batting prowess didn't diminish. His numbers, his performances as captain regarding his batting were exceptional. His form, the way he batted, it didn't. Some players they collapse when they're a captain. Their own form suffers, so that he deserves credit for. As I said, though, I just feel as if he didn't quite have that dressing room behind him. Excuse me. There were stories recently of the likes of Shadab, Shaheen not being overly happy with Babar. And I think at this World Cup, those cracks opened up. You could see matches where players were openly shaking their heads at some of the decisions he was making, at some of the calls. He seemed very under pressure when the likes of Mohammad Rizwan were saying, "Oh, review this." But it was almost like, "Oh yeah, I must review it because Mohammad Rizwan has said that." I know you rely on your wicketkeeper, but some of those reviews were laughable. I mean, as I say, in terms of legacy, his numbers are good as captain, but I think people will question just how good a captain he was. Look, fantastic batter, but for me, as a tactical player, as somebody with how can I put it, didn't quite have that nous of being that tactician, that master tactician of some of the greatest captains that we've seen over the years.
2 new appointments. One, Shaheen Afridi is the T20 captain. Obviously, he's got experience in that role, successfully so with Lahore Qalandars in the PSL. Shah Massoud as Test captain is more interesting. He's only recently back in the side, only got back in the side towards the end of that England Test series in December 2022. His record in Test cricket is not great, in and out the side over a number of years, averages less than 30. He's long been talked about and viewed as someone with leadership skills. He captains Yorkshire. We were joking in the office, if you're captaining Yorkshire and Pakistan at the same time, probably 2 of the hardest jobs in world cricket. What do you make of that appointment? Because Pakistan have one hell of an assignment coming up. A few tests in Australia where they have a totally awful record, and with multiple seamers out, some for clearer reasons than others, they're going to do really, really well to emerge from that tour, even making games close, let alone picking up a victory.
I think if I'd been Shah Massoud, I would have said, make me Test captain after the tour of Australia. Because, as you say, whenever Pakistan go to Australia, on and off the pitch, it's usually a debacle. I'm hoping this time around they can be competitive, but looking at that squad, you wonder just where those performances are going to come from, where those runs are going to come from, especially against Australia. In terms of Shah, look, he's a well-educated guy. He's got good leadership qualities. But this is how Pakistan cricket rolls. He wasn't in the Test side for 2 years recently, and suddenly he's been made captain. I think the rumours were that he'd been sounded out for captaincy. Not just now, but in recent times. So he was their number 1 pick, really, if Babar didn't want to continue as captain. We'll have to see how he goes. He's going to be under a lot of pressure, but as I say, he's cool, he's calm. He's somebody who I think can get the best out of players. You've mentioned Yorkshire. He's shown some potential as captain there, but captaining Pakistan is just on a different level.
Yeah, and I suppose that it's less clear cut in the Test side than it is in the white ball stuff, in that there are very, very few players actually assured of spots in the side. You know, look at the top of the order. Abdullah Shafiq, he started his career well, but he's still only 23, 24. Mohammad Rizwan, people might be listening to this saying, surely he's an option. Well, he's not actually in the team at the moment. So Faraz Ahmed, he's 36. He himself is only just back in the side. And at number 5, you got Saj Sadiq, who's only new to the side as well. So very few viable options, really. And I actually don't mind it. It's obviously a risk, and I think I worry for what the press reaction will be in Pakistan when the Australia series happens, given Pakistan's record there. But I like it. He's got captaincy experience, and he's shown actually in his brief return to the side that he's looking to play cricket in a slightly different way to how he's done it before. He's batted quite quickly. He looks like he's seen what England have done. He looks impressed by that, and he looks to be someone who might try and implement a new brand of cricket and a brand of cricket that suits the players Pakistan have. Do you agree with that?
I do, yeah. I mean, it's a fair point. I think Shan was very positive as Yorkshire captain. And as you say, we've seen the baseball effect for England. Whether Pakistan has that type of player, that type of batter, I'm not so sure. You know, the likes of Abdullah Shafiq, Saj Sadiq, they are solid batters. But, you know, there's potential there for those guys to enhance their reputation, to grow as batters. And I think Shan can lift some of those players to better performances as well. I think he'll carry that. He won't be divisive in the dressing room. As I say, he's an intelligent, he's a smart guy. He's got a lot of experience. He's been in a lot of dressing rooms around the world. So I'm hoping that, I mean, look, the Australia tour, it's probably going to be a disaster. We know that. They will probably get hammered. But if there are some positives that they can get out of that test series, I think that's the most important thing for Pakistan.
One potential new positive is the inclusion of young left-handed top-order bat Saim Ayub. We've seen him in the PSL, and he's, by all accounts, had a good Pakistani domestic season so far. What did you make of his inclusion, and how excited are you by him?
Yeah, see, I'm of the opinion, really, that to me, he looks more comfortable in white ball. I know he's had a good domestic season in red ball. To me, I would have probably left him out of the Australia tour. I know people will say that, what's this guy saying? But I would have probably let him grow in the white ball formats and then skip the Australia tour, because the last thing you want is Saim Ayub to go to Australia facing Stark, Hazelwood, Cummins, etc. And he has an absolute disaster where he bats 4 times and scores a total of 50 runs or something. That's going to, you know, hammer his confidence. It's not going to be great for him. It's a risk, I think, picking him for the red ball version at this moment in time, the red ball format. Personally, I would have picked him for the white ball formats for now. Let him grow, let him get used to international cricket, and then brought him into Test cricket. But he's definitely one for the future, no doubt about that.
From the outside, it just looks so chaotic at the moment. You mentioned it already. You've got active players in administrative roles. Mohammad Hafiz and Wahab Riaz are players who haven't announced their retirement from domestic cricket, at least. And, you know, we've seen Wahab Riaz in his first day in the job, really, hanging one of the key men in Pakistan cricket out to dry in his first press conference in the job. Why do you think it is so chaotic? Why is there a culture of recently retired players or active players being so critical of players not that much younger than them in the jobs? Because it feels like the culture there, that is more of a feature of Pakistani cricket than perhaps any other culture at the moment.
It's incredible, really, and in my opinion, it's unprofessional. I think it's damaging to the dressing room environment. It's damaging to relationships, and there's this culture of giving out information to the media that shouldn't be given out, disclosing confidential information. We saw with Babar Azam's leaked WhatsApp messages recently that was aired. Allegations against the chairman for driving that. And today's press conference from Wahab, there was absolutely no need for him to mention Haris Rauf. If he wasn't picked for the Test series, people wouldn't even have questioned it, I don't think. One or two people might have said, oh, you know, Haris Rauf could have been picked ahead of Hassan Ali or one of the all-rounders, but nobody would have made a song and dance about it. Now, you've opened that can of worms by saying, well, actually, Harris Ralph didn't want to play Test cricket. He didn't want to. We'd offered him, and he's gone into that much detail that he said we actually offered him to bowl 10, 12 overs a day, and he refused. There's just absolutely no need. And this is the problem with Pakistan cricket. It shoots itself in the foot time and time again, and we just don't learn from our mistakes.
Well, Saj, great talking to you as always. I promise we'll have a conversation reflecting on a more positive period of Pakistan cricket at some point in the near future. Cheers for chatting. I'm sure we'll talk again when the Australia tour comes around.
Thanks, Yas.
That is everything for today's show. Cheers, Phil. Cheers, Ben. This has been the Wisden Cricket Weekly podcast. We'll be back next week ahead of the England West Indies series.